and welcome to Australia in Space TV. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media and publishers of the Australia in Space magazine. Today we're joined by the Honourable Christopher Pyne, Chairman with Pyne Partners. We're going to be discussing AUKUS. We even get into the Quad in terms of the space sector opportunities for Australia and beyond. Without further ado, here's Christopher Pyne. Christopher Pyne, thank you very much for joining us on Australia in Space TV. We're going to talk about AUKUS, but I'd firstly like to get a catch-up on what Pyne Partners, and you're the chairman, what you're currently doing in the space sector.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for having me. It's good to be with you and with your viewers. And space is obviously extremely exciting. It's really a very new part of our industry, always been part of our capability because of our close association with the United States. But and we'll talk a bit about it some more over the course of the next 15 or so minutes. But it's certainly gone to a new level in the last few years. And well, I left Parliament 3.5 years ago now. May 2019, I stopped being Minister for Defence. And at the time, I was very involved in the space aspects of defence and had come from industry, innovation and science. I think probably most people would realise, and I was the driving force behind the space agency. So I didn't want to lose, touch with that sector. And defence and space are so interrelated that it would be impossible to be one without the other. And so Pyne Partners, which is the government relations strategic advisory firm that I created after retiring with my business partner, Adam Howard, has got a particular space focus. Casey Lamb, who works for us, she's one of our partners. She specialises in the space sector, so people will see her around the conferences and so forth. I've just got back from the Bengaluru Space Expo in India, for example, right, where I was there with clients involved in that expo. And we've now built up over the last year or so about 7 or 8 space company clients, which is significant, really good companies. I won't name one because it might upset the other 6 or 7, but it's a good clutch of space companies, from startups right through to established companies that are putting hardware into space. And we also run the Taste of Space forum or conference at Parliament House. This year it'll be in November. Last year we couldn't go ahead because of COVID, but this year we are. And Ed Husich is part of that conference. We'll have a dinner that night. Enrico Palermo is the speaker at the dinner. And we'll showcase our clients as well as a number of other people in the space sector to the parliamentarians. So the Parliamentary Friendship Group, which is chaired by Steve Georgianis and James Stevens, who used to be who's actually my predecessor my successor, I should say, in Sturt. I was the predecessor. And then we'll have a dinner with a whole group of industry and public servant activists in the space area. So that's coming up. So we run a program for our clients. We travel to space conferences with clients, and then of course we represent them to Russell Hill, Industry, Innovation and Science, and to Capitol Hill.
So what's your current observations of this sector, given your role in defence and innovation in the past, and for some time as well? And you certainly got out of Parliament at the right time, I think around 3 years or so ago. But yeah, just the current state, your observations of the Australian space sector, and also how AUKUS has come about, given that pedigree that you had. Yeah, just your observations of where we are. Do you think we're on the right trajectory in terms of speed and pace and growth?
Look, I think we are, and space in Australia has changed dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. Most people were shocked when Adelaide won the right to host the International Space Expo because people didn't realise we had any kind of space industry. And of course, before that, before the mid-2010s, we were very happy or satisfied for our defence budget to be spent in space on purchasing French and US mostly capabilities. We didn't think of Australia as having a space industry. We were proud of our record in terms of our academic achievements and our research and development of space capabilities, hence the movie about our involvement in the moon landing. And we think what the DSTG was doing was great, and the CSIRO, but there wasn't a sort of defined or cohesive space industry. And that's changed a lot. It's changed because the government decided when I was there to spend $10 billion on space over the next 10 years, rather than just give it to overseas companies. And that's increased. It's changed because the Australian Space Agency was created, and it was created in Adelaide at Lot 14, and that's led to an ecosystem being started around Lot 14 with the Discovery Centre and Mission Control, and some of those important government agencies, which are now being joined by the private sector in taking advantage of that. Here at the Adelaide Airport, there'll be the space infrastructure for manufacturing, and of course Sydney has started to organise its space industry along similar lines. There's amazing launch activity happening in both equatorial Australia and in southern Australia and in the East Coast. And then, of course, the ACT, Canberra's always had significant government space networks and infrastructure, which we're now taking full advantage of. So space has changed dramatically. Pieces that were there before are now interacting together in a way that they didn't. There's the Space Forum happening here in Adelaide in a few weeks. And so where you used to have sort of gatherings of a few dozen space enthusiasts and people on the periphery of space industry, most of them also had other jobs in order to be able to pay the bills. Well, now that's shifting around, and there are dedicated space companies doing dedicated space work and making their profits out of it. So we have developed. We've got a long way to go, but I've got a lot of confidence in the people in the space industry and those who've been chosen by government to operate agencies like the Space Agency. I think the Space Agency has matured a lot in particularly the last 12 months, and has moved from being a group that saw themselves as regulators and assessors of grant applications to a group of people that are intimately involved in the success of the sector and in making things happen rather than reducing all risk. Because if there's always a risk of everything, and regulators can be either facilitators of things happening or roadblocks for things happening. And I think the Australian Space Agency is maturing along the former lines, not the latter.
Well, I'm assuming it's a coincidence that the space sector is predominantly in Adelaide in Australia as well, given that you're a proud South Australian. So I'll take that as a coincidence only. But obviously there's a strong defence tie in Adelaide as well with the space sector. And just on timing-wise, the Australian National University National Security College just released a paper on triple constellation, sort of raising AUKUS as an agreement, the security agreement between Australia, UK and the US. And we have the UK and Australia Space Bridge sort of framework as well. Your thoughts on AUKUS and how strong space and defence should be aligned with Australia and the opportunities there? You already mentioned that we do have a strong tie to the US space sector already, and we're probably very reliant on US as well as European and French sort of space industry power. But yeah, where do you find AUKUS specifically? Because you've obviously got that government insight in terms of how the sort of the mechanics of governments work. AUKUS does present a unique opportunity, do you think?
Well, we are obviously involved closely with a number of international alliances around space. So you mentioned the US and the UK and Australia Space Bridge, run by Austrade. And then there's the Artemis project, which we're deeply involved in. And that you could probably name another half a dozen particular projects that are Australia, US related. And we're getting more deeply involved with the European Space Agency and the United Arab Emirates, of course, and India. And this is all good collaboration, because not all the solutions for space requirements are found in one particular place. It's very much an international business, which makes it particularly interesting, of course.
Yeah.
I think AUKUS is a great opportunity for the space industry and space regulators to hold onto the coattails, if you like, of a very big shift in our national security focus. The two biggest changes in Australia in the last 10 years in terms of national security, in my opinion, have been the decision by the governments in the mid-2010s to have a sovereign Australian capability in defence, in particular areas of defence and sovereign industrial capability priorities, and to put our effort and money into developing those sovereign capabilities rather than simply being a really good customer. Because obviously we wanted to have jobs for people in science, technology, engineering and mathematics. We wanted to develop those capabilities, but from a Indo-Pacific geostrategic situation, the challenge between China and the United States changes the dynamic for our relationships across the Indo-Pacific. And from a national security point of view, it was and is very important for us to have our own sovereign military capabilities. AUKUS is seen at the moment as a national security focused agreement. It has also the potential to be a space opportunity for space collaboration and technology exchange, because AUKUS at its core is technology transfer and intellectual property sharing between the US and the UK and Australia. And space can be so intimately linked to defence that it seems natural to me that space would form part of one of the areas of AUKUS that should be exploited. Most people think AUKUS is a nuclear submarine program. And yes, of course, it is a nuclear submarine program, because we have been offered by the US the nuclear propulsion module that we weren't previously offered. And that's meant that we have now entered into a nuclear submarine program, for which I fully support. But it's much more than a nuclear submarine program. Through AI and quantum computing, in critical minerals, in UAVs, satellites, laser-directed energy, and therefore in many areas that impact on space, it's about technology exchange and building up all three nations' capabilities, because of course we have very strong capabilities in Australia in those areas. Hypersonics is another good example, which the US and the UK are interested in. And AUKUS is beyond that. It will involve over time things like the pre-positioning of equipment and fuel, the building of new infrastructure that can take US, UK and Australian platforms. It will probably involve joint military exercises. And so and we've already seen things like the Tomahawk missile will be part of AUKUS as Australia purchases Tomahawks from the US, long-range missiles like the JASMA. These will all become part of an AUKUS system. And there's absolutely no reason, because of the nature of space, that it can't also involve space through research and development, academic exchange, and then technology transfer, so that we are the preeminent alliance in space. And I think that's the way our space people should look at it, and they should muscle in where they need to on all those discussions around AUKUS. And I know this is a very long answer, but
No. Well,
AUKUS,
you go.
AUKUS right now is in its development phase. Now is the time for space and other parts of the economy to be saying we'd like to be part of whatever AUKUS ends up looking like. AUKUS is being shaped on Russell Hill, at the MOD in London, and at the Pentagon. And often I've seen in my experience in government over many decades that someone comes along late to the party and says, why aren't we part of that? But sometimes it's just too late, and all the canapes have been eaten. So it's time right now in AUKUS for the space industry to be on the front foot, because they can be part of the shaping of what that looks like, to the advantage of the Australian industry and the sector in general.
And we were definitely going to talk about AUKUS. I think you've framed it very nicely. It does sound like an accelerator to the industry, and obviously aligned to the national security and defence sectors as well. But as you were talking, I can't help but think about the Quad as well, with Japan and India having very strong space industries as well. Like AUKUS, do you think the Quad also, and where the Quad currently is in relation to the space sector, do you think there's opportunities there as well?
No doubt about it. Japan and India both have strong space industries, and India, through the ISRO, has been deeply involved in being at the forefront of space for many decades. Japan, similarly. The quadrilateral, at the moment, there's something of a chimera that the quadrilateral is simply a grouping of like-minded 4 countries that will do good things. It can point certainly to the vaccinations support for India, for example, but it's more than that, and most people realise that. And if it wasn't more than that, then Beijing wouldn't be constantly criticising the quadrilateral. So I think everyone recognises that the Quad can be developed into a number of different features. One of those could easily be space collaboration. In fact, it lends itself to it because we already collaborate in space across those 4 countries. So the quadrilateral could be another opportunity for clearing away hurdles. One of the things that's changed in recent years is a realisation in countries like ours that we have built up so much regulation and bureaucracy in areas like space and defence that we've actually tied our one hand behind our back. ITARs, the fact that the NTIB doesn't work nearly as well as it should, the difficulty in exporting and importing multi-use products and services across jurisdictions like Japan, India, US and UK have actually handed our opponents globally an advantage. And I think the quadrilateral and AUKUS present us with opportunities to clear away those hurdles and make it easier for us to collaborate with like-minded scientists and business people and engineers and mathematicians, whoever they might be, to get the best results possible for what is effectively, in inverted commas, our side.
Yeah, and it's a very, as you mentioned, an international industry as well. Just to close off, where do you think Australia's strengths are, and maybe any call to action in terms of the industry and where it need to pick up pace in certain areas? But yeah, definitely, where do you see Australia's sort of strengths, particularly when you talk about your sort of your client profiles as well? Do they lean in any particular direction?
Well, I think we have 2 strengths, and they're 2 quite different ones. Because we have a long history in space, going back to Woomera in the 50s and 60s, which we inexplicably gave away, not gave away the areas, of course, but gave away that strong capability. We have an historical record of achievement, and as our friends know, we are a perfect place for the testing of space hardware. We are quite untouched in terms of the Woomera testing range. It's extraordinarily flat, and it's not infected, if you like, by a lot of ordnance that has been spread out over many decades, unlike other testing ranges in the world. So we have traditional strengths, geographic strengths, because we're a long way away from prying eyes, and we are a big continent. So places like Woomera are obviously capabilities. And we have a pretty uncluttered space around us, if you know what I mean, because we haven't had a lot of the testing and so forth and the satellites being put into the LEO that other countries have done. But we also have a much more modern capability, which is that we are, because we haven't been involved in the space industry to the same extent as, say, Britain and France and the US, we have very few preconceived views of what we can and can't do. So we have a nimble and agile space industry, which is starting to feel its oats and is open to all new ideas. And because space has changed so much, small satellites, putting up smaller payloads that don't last nearly as long but are useful, is an area in which I think Australia has a strong advantage because it lends itself to a newer industry. It's cheaper, it's no less technologically proficient, but it also is an area where small companies can make progress because they haven't got huge overheads and people who've been making decisions for decades that find it hard to change their mind about things. So I think there's a couple of advantages. They're both very different advantages. And I think that's where we are seeing that's where the industry is going. If you think about companies that are setting up here like AT Space for launch purposes or Fleet Space, putting smaller satellites into orbit, we are really making progress. So it's a very exciting time.
I think the other one is the partnerships, as we've been discussing as well, with the likes of AUKUS, those local strengths that we have in Australia, but those partnerships does lend a lot of weight to what we can do and sort of a capability enabler for us as well that we can reach out to. So Christopher Pyne, the chairman with Pyne Partners, thank you very much for joining us today on Australia in Space TV, and we'll see you in Adelaide in a few weeks.
It's a great pleasure, Chris. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you very much.